I look so much like my dad, you know. Maybe not now, but what about if I do this?
Don Knotts was the king of weird. Every time he looked nervous, people went crazy. Sewn up. But behind the famous characters and Emmys was a part that was more quiet and difficult: Dad. We're not just pulling back the curtain in this show, we're going into the living room. We'll see a side of Don that you've never seen before through the eyes of his daughter Karen. A version with rules you didn't expect, quiet sacrifices, and one memorable moment that people still talk about today. One choice she made in The Story of Her Last Hours has been following her around for years, and you might understand why after hearing it. Living with Don Knotts as a child, I lived with Don Knotts. Karen Knotts had a unique experience as a dad, one in which comedy wasn't just a behavioral trait, but a language you use every day. She remembers her dad as always being funny, even off stage, using humor to ease tension or make even the most boring family time stand out. But besides the jokes, she talks about a man who is strict and has a soft structure. Don was very strict about doing things the right way, which helped her stay grounded and think deeply while she lived. Under the roof of a man whose stupid, wide-eyed TV character is loved by millions. He was both a friend and a mom, showing her that being warm and responsible could go together. Karen's road into show business wasn't an accident. Being in the presence of such being a well-known and unique person didn't stop her from wanting to succeed, it shaped it. Looking at her dad, she got a true view of show business by going through fame with both happiness and trouble. It wasn't. It was always glamorous, but it had purpose. Because of how dedicated he was to his work, Karen tried to make a living by doing comedy and acting. Tied Up in Knots, her one-woman show, is an ode to both Don's life and their relationship as parents and children. She made her own by accepting the echoes of his voice. She built a link between the laughter of their generations. Karen's memory of her father being a Holocaust victim doesn't come from a play or set, it comes from her own life. From his hospital bed. He was very weak because he was sick as he lay dying, but even though he was getting old, he could still tell jokes that made his wife and her laugh out loud. She had to leave, not because she was sad, but because she didn't want to laugh. In front of her father who was dying. The event kept coming back to her until a friend told her of it. Don lived for making people laugh. This was the last present a man would give. Nothing could shut down what made him unique. His funny ability to make people feel better. Not only did Don Knotts give Karen access to Hollywood, but he was also a good father. He taught her principles, showed her how to be strong, and showed her the real person behind the fame. When she talks about him, she doesn't just say nice things about him, she really loves him. He was the same man at home, calm, thoughtful, and friendly. Everyone knew Don as Barney Fife. He was dad to Karen, the man who loved quietly, took the time to talk, and left of the people he touched were more important to him than the number of viewers. Moved deeply, especially by his daughter. But to really understand the man Karen called Dad, you need to remember a time when laughing wasn't fun, it was a way to stay alive. People who read Laughing Through Pain will remember that Don Knotts' early years in Morgantown, West Virginia, were very poor and full of mental chaos. Being the youngest of Don grew up with 4 boys and parents who were already having a hard time making ends meet. Comfort didn't always come first. His mother, Elsie, was 40 years old when he was born, which is pretty old. Of a child in a home that is already struggling. The family just lost their farm, and they were short on cash. Not many. Because of this harsh setting, Don often had to go through childhood without the warmth, or most kids don't think twice about being stable. The scariest part of Don's childhood was his father, William Jesse Knotts, was there, and his fight with schizophrenia and fear filled the air because of drinking. His dad's behavior was hard to predict, and sometimes aggressive. Don would remember times when his father held a knife to his throat and threatened him. These his traumatic experiences were made worse by the fact that his much older brothers didn't offer him any mental support, who were often cold or rude. Because of this, the child's childhood was not formed by care, but by emotional survival, a crucial time that made me feel deeply anxious and like I needed to get away. Don got away by making things up in his head. Cut off from family and the strange world outside, he made his own world, which was safer, nicer, and easier to manage than the one he lived in. He made up a character for a friend and then a ventriloquist's dummy called Danny, a person who helped him get involved with a number of one-man comedy shows for himself and other people. This wasn't exactly what you'd call self-entertainment. A way out. It gave Don power and happiness, and he learned that he could change his fear. Laugh, even if it's just for a short time. Those first bumps and leaks turned out to be the stuff that would later make him a great comedian. In real life, he didn't just act nervous on TV, he was always nervous, and he shared that nervousness in a way that people found funny. But a lot of fun. He spoke with stuttering, his face twitched, and his eyes were wide. Not just exaggerated traits, but real expressions of the child he had been. What started out as a way to deal with stress turned into one of the most recognized comic characters. TV in the United States. By turning his pain into laughter, Don Knotts found out not only healing but also a way to connect with a lot of people. Important brother of Don Knotts, it was Sid who stood out among Don Knotts' older brothers, and not just in Don's mind, but in making him into the man he would become. In Morgantown, the family home was often a place of in a time of stress and disorder, Sid gave Don something very rare, laughter. In Don's eyes, bigger than life, Sid was smart and funny by nature, which broke up the sad way they were raised. Not like instead of staying away from or hitting out at other brothers who were going through hard times, Sid felt safe and encouraged when he was with Don. Even their mother would laugh at him during the darkest times, and Don took those times in like sunshine during a storm. Sid's humor wasn't fake, it came naturally, on the spot, and was very real. As a child, Don watched with wide eyes as his bigger brother made fun of their sad situation. They looked at Sid's timing, performance, and how he could make a normal moment fun. Don's future as a comedian began with that exposure. Being funny wasn't the only goal. It was about using comedy to get through hard times. Sid showed Don how to laugh. Freedom and safety could both be found there. Sid was Don's first listener, leader, and teacher in many ways. And funny role model all in one. Sid's death came on quickly and seemed to change Don for good. When Sid finally passed away, he was very young when he had his serious asthma attack. Died. It made him sad because he had lost more than just a brother. He had lost a hero and a bright light of happiness in a sad home. His whole life will always be marked by this kind of sadness. This made the loneliness worse, made the desire to hide in one's thoughts stronger, and he felt close to the only brother who had ever understood him through the comedic world. Sid's skill stayed with Don. In his work, he has played many roles, from Barney Fife to a huge number of others. Sid's brilliant wit and daring humor made people laugh. Don would talk to Sid more than once, revered and loved, even if it meant pointing out that he was the father figure who shaped his life. The urge to be funny. In that way, Sid was living through what Don did. Laughter from people who would never know his name will always remember him. The happiness each joke was based on a memory of a brother who made them laugh, which would one day lead to a cure. Turn on the screens all over America. From soldier to showman, when World War II stopped Don Knotts' early plans to work in show business, it also put him in the world of professional acting out of the blue. Signing up for the Don was sent to the Special Services Division of the U.S. Army in 1943, not to fight, but to help with special operations. Entertainment and confidence were important to this elite unit. He was a member of the 6,817th Special Services Group there. Battalion, the group in charge of putting on shows for troops stationed in faraway parts of the Pacific. Don did not use a gun, but jokes and pratfalls instead, keeping people's hearts up during one of the worst times in world history. Don went on tour with Stars and Gripes, the Army's moving show, and did comedic sketches that took advantage of the silly parts of military life and everyone's complaints. Often, these habits were put on in tough conditions, like sweltering heat, on homemade stages, and for tired soldiers looking for something to do. A lot of people connected with Don's nervous energy and unique way of speaking. Even among the more experienced artists he shared the stage with, he stood out. His time keeping soldiers entertained across the Pacific gave him a great opportunity to learn by doing. Don really learned how to be an actor here, not on Broadway or in Hollywood. Being in the military was more than just a stage in Don's life, it gave him courage. He used to be shy and soft-spoken, but he learned to speak up and got support from big groups of admirers. From the Army. Putting on shows every night, often for different groups of men in different islands, he improved his timing, strength, and ability to change. These events did not prepare him not only for the technical needs of entertainment but also for the emotional ones. For the first time, Don started to think he could make it as an artist. In the form of a dream but also in terms of fate. He was given many awards for his work. Medals for things like the World War II Victory Medal and the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal. He was given the Philippine Liberation Medal and 4 Bronze Service Stars. Among his awards were he got the Good Conduct Medal and a Marksman Badge for training with the M1 carbine. Even though most of the medals showed that the man was driven by discipline and honor, since the activities were for success. Not just because he got awards, but because it changed him, his time in uniform changed him for good. He turned him into a polished, sure of himself performer who became one of the most beloved funny actors in America. Building confidence, Don Knotts came home from fighting in the U.S. Army during World War II with a new sense of purpose and a want to follow his love for performing. Being aware of how important formal schooling is, he went to West Virginia University and chose to major in teaching with a speech minor. The years after the war, Don had never experienced a more stable and helpful setting than the one on campus. And he did well. He improved his voice control and public speaking skills through schoolwork and speech lessons. He spoke with clarity that would later become a trademark of his comic style. Don started to for the first time performance shouldn't just be a dream or a way to stay alive, it should be seen as a real job that can be learned. Don was so excited about college life when he wasn't in class that it surprised everyone. A lot of people knew him as a shy and quiet kid. He became a member of Phi Sigma Kappa, that's where he made friends and got better at public speech. He also he took part in campus plays and local radio shows, which gave him important stage time. Technical know-how. These performances gave him a chance to try out different timings, character work, and improvising, skills that would be very important to his later work on TV. Every sketch and student play were both steps that helped him feel more confident and present. When the new star got his big break on Broadway he worked with Andy Griffith for the first time on the comedy No Time for Sergeants. He got great reviews for his role as Nervous Corporal, which showed how good he is at playing roles. He would always be associated with nervous underdogs who win, which was true of all of his most beloved parts. It looks like Don Knotts was right after hard work, learning, and not giving up. By turning a dreamer into a performance of substance before the judge. The subject matter of school life, the feedback from students and teachers, and the risk-free environment of experimenting gave him some tools he could use to do well in show business. Besides that, this learning experience stood in the order in Knotts' life was very different from this, and it gave him tools to not only act but also be able to look at how communication, storytelling, and acting work. So, Don Knotts' time in college helped him get ready for his job and maybe even for his legacy. But just as his star started to grow, something inside him felt like it might fall back down. The hidden battle, Don Knotts' twitchy charm and comedic nervousness were masks for a very real and secret battle with anxiety that he carried with him his whole life. His life. Don had a lot of stage fright and self-doubt even before he became famous. That often made him very weak physically and mentally before shows. Even as crowds, Don wasn't playing a character who was awkward or nervous because he thought it was funny and charming. He was showing how troubled he was inside. A man who could make millions of people laugh had a hard time every day. With fears that he was never good enough, a feeling that came from having a hard youth. And made worse by the pressures of success. Don turned to deal with his crippling worry. To medicine in the 1950s and 1960s, when mental health care was at its peak, was not well understood and was often looked down upon. Doctors gave patients tranquilizers and he took medicines to help him deal with his anxiety before performances, but he became dependent on them over time. These drugs made his anxiety go away, but they also made him mentally distant and, at times, not feeling well. These things helped him work in Hollywood, but they were also, instead of getting to the bottom of his problems, they covered them up. Don's great sense of humor was often done through a fog of medication and mental pressure, driven by sheer will. Along with great fame came great trials within. People think of Don Knotts as a loving, wide-eyed average person could not have been more different from the man who spent hours doubting himself on the way to the stage. His worry about failing grew as the fans, directors, and studios all have standards. He had started to act like he was going crazy. He kept telling himself that, by some chance, he was really sick, even though doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. Even worse, that same worry began to hurt his health and make his inner world even worse. Karma. Then fiercely he hit back, making a cycle where fame made people afraid, and fears made people lose his job. Don's mental health problems hurt his relationships and personal life in the end. His long work hours and mental withdrawal made it impossible for him to connect with friends and keeping things stable at home. He split up with his first wife and then married someone else. His relationship suffered because of his mental turmoil. On the set, his co-workers noticed that he needed to be in charge and perfection, which turned out to be in complete conflict with his comedic genius. A man respected for making other people happy, but had sadness that was hard to share. Even that's why he kept going to show that behind every funny guy is an incredibly difficult man. Dodgy love life of Don Knotts. Don Knotts' love life was as multifaceted and complicated as the roles he played in movies. He got married 3 times over the course of his life, with each relationship marking a new stage in his personal and work life. Catherine Metz was his first wife. They got married in 1947, not long after he got back from World War II. And while he was still getting used to being in show business. They had 2 kids together. But as Don's fame grew with the Andy Griffith Show, Hollywood stress and long hours got to him. The long hours made them apart, which led to their divorce in 1964. He got married again in 1974 to Laura Lee Chuckna, but that union also ended after almost 10 years. Made difficult by the fact that his mental health was getting worse. Don didn't get married until 2002. He was married to Frances Yarborough, his third and last wife, until he died in 2006. Fame helped Don's career, but it put a strain on his domestic life. What it takes to work in television, it was hard for him to stay emotionally available in his relationships because he had problems with worry and self-doubt. Being too perfect on set didn't hurt him. That always leads to security at home. According to reports, as his fame grew, he had a hard time with his personal life because he was so focused on his work. He got married. This was made worse by the fact that he tended to keep his mental pain inside, making it hard to talk to each other when there is disagreement. The end of his first 2 marriages was there was a lack of communication and no scandal, but the main problem stayed the same. Don had a hard time being both the man everyone loved and the man his partners needed. It was interesting to see that. Don was always portrayed as the drunk and awkward guy who, in real life, would hardly talk to a woman, but he liked meeting women. On screen showed a very different picture. Off-screen, he was never quite the show's top choice. He was more or less what was called a player's player. His co-workers remember him as friendly and sure of himself. In contrast, those traits caused a lot of stress. In the social groups of Hollywood, people liked him, and it was said that he had no problem getting women's attention. That too is something that made Don very interesting. He seemed to know how to let people in. Undervalue him while giving off a quiet charm that few people expected from the man behind Barney Fife. There was a big difference between Don's last marriage to Frances Yarborough and his first marriage. A love story. They didn't meet until they were both past their prime and not trying to make a living. No more highs or general approval. Frances was much younger, and she felt a lot of what she talked about. Don's last years were calmed by her. They got to know each other through more than just red carpets. On love and friendship shared. Don had been through enough by the time they got married. Life's ups and downs that he could finally find some peace with a partner. To Frances, he wasn't just an actor, he was a man who was still looking for relationship. Their secret marriage gave peace and comfort during the last few months of Don's life, with Frances by his side when he died, proof that love stories can have happy ends even when things go badly. Changing the story of why Don Knotts quit the Andy Griffith Show. His career took a big turn when he did the show in 1965. It was a brave and risky move. Back then, Don thought the show would end after its 5th season, so he started looking for other work, including a deal with Universal Studios to make 5 movies. When the show suddenly went on, Don was already set on his new road, so he didn't come back as a regular cast member. Even so, he later made guest performances, but when he left, Barney Fife was no longer a thing. Had won 5 Emmys and made him well known. Don was eager to show that he was more than just a helper, he could lead them. Following this, Don looked into a number of to change the direction of his work. He took on film roles. He played the lead role in The Incredible Mr. Limpet, 1964, a family movie with some animation that showed off his strange charm, and The Reluctant Astronaut, 1967, where he once again played the sweet victim. But in 1969, he took the biggest risk of all with The God of Love, a racy comedy in which he played a single man who ran an adult magazine. People didn't want to see the nervous deputy as a sex symbol in the movie.